Comfortable with this idea that a God is the best explanation for it, what happens next is something we see within syncretic compositions of religion and religions as they grow and change throughout time. And that is, we get away from the Bible, the Quran, the doctrinal orthodox versions, but we're desperate to cling on to the idea, the notion of God, because it keeps us from feeling too ignorant. And so people will actually redefine God and say, God is that thing which explains the origin of the universe. They've told us nothing. They've given us no clear description of the attributes or characterizations that you would find in a God, except to say that here's a big mystery. We don't know how this came about, but whatever the properties are that explain that mystery, those are the properties that we're going to label God. That's not a proof for the existence of God. It's not an argument for the existence of God. It's a proof that we're prone to assumptions. It's a proof that we are terrified of not knowing, we're terrified of our ignorance, that in the reality that we inhabit, whether it is contingent or not, we are limited not just by our current intellect and current levels of knowledge, but perhaps limited permanently from finding the answers to some of the biggest questions. We may be able to find them, we may not. Why is there something instead of nothing? What we're really talking about is existence. Why does existence exist? And it would seem to me that if there was an example of anything that would be considered necessary and non-contingent, it would be existence. That existence exists necessarily. And I think that there's a good argument to be made that the cosmos is at least partially synonymous with existence. It is the fabric, in a metaphoric sense, that undergirds our universe, other potential universes, multiverses, things that we're not even completely aware of. And to say, why is there something rather than nothing when we're talking about something like existence, is to misunderstand the question itself. It's just not very comforting to people to say it exists because it exists. And instead of recognizing this discomfort and acknowledging that, at least for now, it may be the best, most accurate explanation that we may be currently blocked, instead some people have taken it in stride and created an argument that asserts that no, existence doesn't just exist. It has another foundation. It has a foundation in a God. It has taken our discomfort with the idea that we might have to acknowledge we can't have an explanation for this, or this, it doesn't need an explanation. And it's painted this warm, fuzzy, man in the sky cares about us, God type of model, which, by the way, we don't seem to be able to confirm or know anything about. And the argument is that this being exists necessarily, that it needs no explanation for its existence.
Okay, lots of things here, Josh. Do you have anything you want to add? Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not realize I didn't pull that up on the screen, so I apologize to you guys, Matt. And I apologize to you, Matt. You're beautiful. For some reason, that got missed. But yeah.
I think Matt's voice could be one of those voices that you hear in an audiobook. You know, those mindfulness sessions, you just have Matt's voice. I think it is very soothing. It is very, very soothing. But I mean, apart from the voice being very soothing in that session, I think that that's not really how people use cosmological arguments or arguments for the existence of God. I mean, people don't use these arguments to just say makes me feel good, because I mean, I don't necessarily think that being a Christian makes life way easier than not being a Christian in an epistemological sense, or in just a practical living sense. Maybe it does in a philosophical sense. I do agree with that. I think Christianity provides the best explanatory worldview, and in all the kind of like the ways philosophy works, though in the most practical way of like, well, how then shall we live? I don't necessarily think that Christianity makes things way easier than the non-Christian. In fact, I think that sometimes it makes it harder. So I don't think that Matt's idea that we're creating arguments to just make ourselves feel more comfortable is a very good argument, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I'd add is just like the terms Matt uses is very vague. Like I wrote this down in my notes. I'm like, existence exists necessarily. Like, what does that even mean? Like, the classical theist is literally just going to say like God's essence is existence. So like, yes, Matt, you're right. God exists. So like, it's like, that doesn't mean it. And like the cosmos is, wait, what was it? It's just the cosmos is, or something like that. And it's like, well, could I just say the foundation is as it is? Like that doesn't put any like words to, like he hasn't described like what he means by cosmos. Like maybe he means like all of like matter, energy, or space time or something, or like this multiverse. But like the way Matt's described it, it's very vague. And I could say all of this, like, yeah, Matt, I agree with you. It's God, right? Like he isn't putting any like qualifying terms and like what he means. It's just very vague. So it's not helpful.
I definitely agree with you. It is a very, very vague argument. It kind of reminds me of those existentialist aphorisms of Nietzsche, or those discussions of Hegel or Heidegger, who just kind of talk about all these crazy terms, and they're like, oh, this is an ontology of X and Y and Z, or being in time, and you're reading it and you're like, well, you're really going to have to spend your entire life just trying to understand one sentence, because it's very vague. So I mean, that kind of reminds me of that, kind of puts that picture into my mind. But I think he is kind of moving away from this is the philosophical response to the contingency argument to more the existential psychoanalysis of the usage of contingency arguments, which I think is an interesting thing to look at. But I think it perhaps goes beyond the scope of what a good philosophical kind of discussion, or at least a purely philosophical discussion based on the contingency argument, is meant to be about. These things kind of go beyond it and not really addressing the actual argument itself.
Yeah.